The crystal chandeliers cast gentle light across Ms. Olivia Parker's first-grade classroom at Westwick Academy, Manhattan's most prestigious elementary school. Olivia adjusted her simple cardigan, trying to blend in with the opulence surrounding her, a stark reminder of how out of place she felt among New York's elite as a scholarship student turned teacher. Her gaze drifted across 20 perfectly groomed children in designer uniforms until it settled on a small girl in the back corner. Grace Montgomery sat hunched over her desk, dark curls cascading over her face like a protective curtain, eyes fixed downward, while other students participated enthusiastically. Principal Harrison had mentioned nothing about special needs students during orientation, focusing instead on the generous donations their parents provided. Yet something about Grace's isolation struck Olivia as familiar, awakening memories of her own childhood spent watching the world from the sidelines. "Ms. Parker, she never talks," whispered Penelope, a precocious blonde whose father owned half of Midtown. "Daddy says her family is weird, and we shouldn't ask questions." The comment sent an uncomfortable ripple through Olivia as she observed Grace's tense shoulders and the way she flinched when classmates laughed too loudly. Not shyness, she realized. Something different. Something Olivia recognized from her years volunteering at her mother's speech therapy practice. When the bell rang for lunch, Olivia noticed Grace didn't join the stampede toward the cafeteria, instead pulling a lunchbox from her backpack with practiced precision. The bodyguard waiting discreetly by the door, unusual even by Westwick standards, confirmed Olivia's suspicions about the family's weird reputation. "Grace, would you mind staying a moment?" Olivia asked softly, approaching slowly to avoid startling the child. The girl's eyes widened with something between fear and resignation, her small hands gripping her desk as if preparing for disappointment. Olivia knelt beside Grace's desk, maintaining a respectful distance while keeping her face visible. "I noticed you seem to prefer working alone," she said, carefully forming each word while maintaining eye contact. Then, following a hunch, she raised her hands and signed the same message. The transformation was instantaneous. Grace's expression bloomed with astonishment, her hands flying up to sign back with surprising elegance for a 7-year-old. "Nobody ever signs to me here. My last teacher made me try to read lips all day. My cousin is deaf," Olivia signed back, her heart swelling as Grace's shoulders relaxed for the first time. "Would you prefer I sign while teaching, or use both speaking and signing?" Grace's hands trembled with excitement as she responded, unaware of the classroom door opening behind them. "Both, please. Daddy tries to learn, but he's so busy with work that—" Her hands froze mid-sentence, eyes fixed on something behind Olivia, her expression shifting from joy to nervousness. A shadow fell across the desk, as Olivia turned to find herself looking up at the most intimidating man she'd ever encountered. Tall and impeccably dressed in what was unmistakably a bespoke suit, his dark eyes assessed her with calculated precision, while his hand rested protectively on Grace's shoulder. "Mr. Montgomery," Olivia said, standing quickly and extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "I'm Ms. Parker, Grace's new teacher. I was just telling her that I know American Sign Language." Jonathan Montgomery's expression remained unreadable as he studied her, his handshake firm but not aggressive. "You didn't mention this accommodation in her file," he said, voice surprisingly soft, despite his imposing presence. "It wasn't in her file," Olivia replied, noting how Grace watched their conversation with focused attention, her small hands gripping her father's sleeve. "I recognize the signs from my experience with deaf education." Montgomery's gaze intensified, as if reevaluating everything about the young teacher before him. "Most people at this school treat my daughter's deafness as an inconvenience to be managed or ignored," he stated flatly, signing simultaneously for Grace's benefit. "Deafness isn't a problem to manage, Mr. Montgomery," Olivia responded, signing along with her words. "It's simply a different way of experiencing the world that requires adaptation from those around her, not just from Grace." The classroom fell into silence as Montgomery processed her words, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Grace hasn't smiled at school in months," he finally said, his signing more hesitant than his spoken words, but clearly practiced with care. "Daddy, can Ms. Parker stay my teacher forever?" Grace signed enthusiastically, her entire demeanor transformed from the withdrawn child of moments before. "She understands me." Montgomery's protective stance relaxed slightly as he observed his daughter's excitement. "I have meetings with the administration tomorrow regarding Grace's education plan," he said, his tone suggesting these meetings typically didn't end favorably. "With your permission, I'd like to be there," Olivia offered, her professional instincts overriding her natural caution around this clearly powerful man. Grace deserves an advocate who understands deaf education. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Montgomery asked, a strange mix of surprise and something like respect crossing his features. Most people in Manhattan recognize the name immediately. "Should I?" Olivia asked honestly, momentarily confused by the question. "I'm new to Westwick. Just graduated from NYU's teaching program last spring." Jonathan Montgomery studied her with renewed interest before checking his watch. "My driver will bring Grace home today," he said, handing Olivia a business card with only a phone number embossed in silver. "Call this number tonight. We have much to discuss about my daughter's education." That evening, Olivia paced her small apartment in Astoria, the business card burning a hole in her pocket as she debated the wisdom of calling. Her roommate, Jenny, had nearly choked on her coffee when Olivia mentioned the Montgomery name casually over dinner. "Are you insane?" Jenny hissed, pulling up a news article on her phone showing Jonathan Montgomery exiting a courthouse. "He's practically royalty in the criminal underworld. Real estate, nightclubs, shipping. Legitimate on paper, but everyone knows better." Olivia's stomach dropped as she scrolled through more articles. Rumors of connections to organized crime, charges mysteriously dropped, competitors who suddenly abandoned projects after discussions with Montgomery representatives. The polished businessman who'd stood in her classroom seemed worlds away from these allegations. Yet Grace's hopeful face kept appearing in her mind, a child caught between worlds, isolated by both her disability and her father's reputation. Closing her eyes, Olivia dialed the number, her teacher's instinct overriding her self-preservation. "Ms. Parker," Montgomery answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "I assume by now you've done your research on me and my family." "I have," she admitted, refusing to play games. "But my concern is for Grace, not your business dealings." A long pause stretched between them before Montgomery spoke again, his voice softer. "My driver will pick you up in 20 minutes. I believe it's better we discuss my daughter's education in person." The black SUV that arrived had windows tinted dark enough to be illegal, the silent driver opening the door without making eye contact. As Manhattan's skyline grew closer, Olivia rehearsed what she would say about Grace's educational needs, trying to ignore the voice in her head screaming this was a terrible idea. The vehicle pulled into an underground garage beneath a gleaming residential tower in Tribeca, where another suit-clad man escorted her to a private elevator, requiring both a key card and fingerprint scan. Security measures far beyond what even Manhattan's wealthy typically employed. "Ms. Parker," Montgomery greeted her, as the elevator opened directly into a stunning penthouse apartment. "Thank you for coming despite what you must have read." Grace sat at a grand piano in the corner, her face lighting up when she spotted Olivia. She ran across the room, signing rapidly about her excitement that her teacher had come to visit. "Grace, darling, slow down," Montgomery signed and spoke simultaneously, a gentle smile transforming his stern features. "Ms. Parker is here to discuss your schoolwork." Olivia felt a strange disconnect between the feared businessman from news articles and this devoted father who had clearly invested considerable time learning to communicate with his daughter. The penthouse itself told a similar contradictory story. While undeniably luxurious with its panoramic Manhattan views, the space had been thoughtfully modified for Grace. Visual doorbell indicators, specialized lighting, and children's artwork prominently displayed, alongside what appeared to be priceless modern art. The home of a criminal mastermind or a loving father. Perhaps both. "I've arranged for us to meet with Principal Harrison and the board tomorrow morning," Montgomery explained, as a housekeeper silently delivered coffee. "They've been resistant to hiring a qualified interpreter, citing budget constraints." Olivia nearly choked on her coffee. Budget constraints at Westwick? The school that just built an Olympic-sized swimming pool? "Precisely why I requested your presence," Montgomery replied, his eyes calculating as he studied her. "They seem more responsive to outside educators than to my requests." Grace returned from her bedroom carrying a science project, eager to show Olivia the solar system model she'd constructed. Her precise explanations in sign language revealed an intelligence far beyond what her previous academic performance had suggested. "She's extremely bright," Olivia observed, watching Grace demonstrate the planetary rotations. "Her struggles aren't cognitive. She's simply been denied proper communication tools." Montgomery's jaw tightened, a flash of something dangerous crossing his features. "Her mother was deaf as well. Before she died, she made me promise Grace would have normal experiences, not be isolated in deaf-only environments. Is that why you chose Westwick instead of schools with established deaf programs? Olivia asked, understanding dawning. You're trying to honor her mother's wishes. Grace tugged at her father's sleeve, signing that she was thirsty, and Montgomery responded with practiced ease, his signs clumsy but effective. In that moment, Olivia glimpsed the depth of his devotion. A man accustomed to solving problems with money or intimidation, humbling himself to learn a new language for his daughter. Her mother, Ava, was an artist, Montgomery said quietly after Grace left for the kitchen. We met when I was still working on construction sites before, he gestured vaguely at the penthouse, before everything changed. The morning meeting at Westwick exceeded Olivia's worst expectations, with Principal Harrison repeatedly referring to Grace's special needs while emphasizing the school's generous acceptance of her condition. Montgomery sat unnervingly still throughout, his calm demeanor somehow more intimidating than any display of anger. Ms. Parker has outlined a reasonable accommodation plan that falls well within ADA requirements, Montgomery finally interjected, his voice carrying the subtle threat of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I'm prepared to fund these accommodations myself if necessary. Harrison's smile remained fixed, but his eyes darted nervously toward the board members. Mr. Montgomery, while we appreciate your generosity, introducing sign language into the classroom might distract the other children from their studies. Olivia leaned forward, professional indignation overriding her intimidation. Research actually shows the opposite effect. Exposure to multiple communication methods enhances cognitive development for all students. The meeting ended with reluctant agreement to implement Olivia's suggestions on a trial basis, though Montgomery's expression as they left suggested he considered the matter permanently resolved. He walked Olivia to her classroom, maintaining a professional distance that still somehow conveyed alliance. Thank you, he said simply, pausing at her door. Not many people would advocate for Grace with such conviction, especially knowing my reputation. Before Olivia could respond, a commotion erupted down the hallway, raised voices and the unmistakable sound of security radios. Montgomery's posture changed instantly, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket as his security detail materialized from seemingly nowhere. Secure the building, Montgomery ordered, his voice cold as he scanned the corridor. Ms. Parker, please lock your classroom door and keep the children away from windows. Through the growing chaos, Olivia glimpsed a man being restrained by security guards at the school entrance, his face contorted with rage as he shouted something unintelligible. Montgomery's expression hardened as he recognized the intruder. Vasquez, he muttered, the single word laden with history. Call Detective Rivera, he instructed his security team, then turned to Olivia with unexpected gentleness. Please keep Grace safe. I'll handle this. The children gathered around Olivia as she calmly announced they'd be having an indoor recess, her years of training kicking in despite her racing heart. Grace alone remained at her desk, her eyes reflecting understanding beyond her years. The lockdown lasted 3 hours, during which Olivia transformed the frightening situation into an impromptu sign language lesson for the entire class. The children's natural curiosity provided welcome distraction, as Grace beamed with pride, teaching her peers basic signs. Outside the classroom, a tense standoff had ended with Vasquez's arrest, though the whispered conversations between staff members suggested this was far more than a random security incident. Words like territory, rival families, and revenge drifted through faculty conversations that abruptly stopped when Olivia approached. By dismissal time, police officers still lingered in the hallways, and parents arrived in droves to collect their children early, casting fearful glances toward Grace, who sat quietly reading, seemingly oblivious to the chaos her father's presence had caused. The isolation that surrounded her was palpable, invisible walls erected by parents who kept their children at a careful distance. Ms. Parker, a moment, please, Principal Harrison called as Olivia prepared to escort Grace to her waiting security detail. His typically composed demeanor had given way to undisguised anxiety, sweat beading along his hairline despite the cool air conditioning. Today's incident has raised serious concerns among our parent community, Harrison began, his words carefully measured. The board has called an emergency meeting regarding Mr. Montgomery's situation and its impact on our school environment. Olivia felt her chest tighten with indignation. You mean they're discussing whether to expel Grace because of who her father is? Harrison's silence provided all the confirmation she needed, anger rising in her throat. She's a 7-year-old child who's finally beginning to connect with her classmates, and you're punishing her for circumstances beyond her control. Mr. Montgomery's business dealings have placed this institution at risk, Harrison countered, lowering his voice. Today's intruder carried a weapon, Ms. Parker. We have a responsibility to protect all our students. The revelation stunned Olivia momentarily, the reality of the danger hitting her with sudden clarity. What does the board expect me to do until they reach their decision? Continue teaching, but prepare your students for possible changes, Harrison replied vaguely, and understand that your advocacy for Grace Montgomery has not gone unnoticed. Your probationary contract gives us considerable flexibility regarding your continued employment. The implied threat hung in the air between them, as Olivia gathered her belongings, rage and helplessness battling for dominance. Outside, Montgomery's security chief waited with Grace, his expression softening almost imperceptibly at the child's excited signing about her classmates learning to sign hello. Mr. Montgomery requests your presence at the residence this evening, he stated formally, holding the car door open. He apologizes for the inconvenience but insists it's urgent regarding Grace's safety. The penthouse felt different in evening light, the Manhattan skyline a glittering backdrop to the tension that filled the space. Montgomery stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the city lights, turning only when Grace ran to embrace him. I've arranged for Grace to stay with her aunt in Connecticut until this situation resolves, he explained once his daughter had been settled with a movie in her bedroom. The school board has made their position quite clear, despite my financial contributions. They can't simply expel her because of who you are, Olivia protested, pacing the expansive living room. There are laws protecting students from discrimination. Montgomery's laugh held no humor. Laws apply differently to people like me, Ms. Parker. They'll cite security concerns, create documentation of behavioral issues that never occurred, and make Grace's life miserable until I withdraw her voluntarily. The bitter truth of his words settled between them, as Olivia sank onto the leather sofa, the magnitude of institutional injustice weighing heavily on her shoulders. What about other schools? Private academies with deaf education programs? Vasquez's appearance today wasn't random, Montgomery replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous timbre. His family has been tracking Grace's movements, looking for leverage against me. The implications hit Olivia like a physical blow. Grace wasn't just facing educational discrimination, but actual danger because of her father's business. Why would they target a child? What could they possibly gain? The Vasquez family lost everything in Colombia before coming here, Montgomery explained, fingers tightening around his glass. They believe my shipping company smuggled their rival's product through Miami, costing them millions and 3 family members. Olivia's mind reeled at the casual mention of drug trafficking, her teacher's worldview colliding violently with the shadow economy that operated alongside legitimate society. Her silence prompted Montgomery to continue, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked windows. I've been dismantling those connections for years, transitioning to clean business only, but families like Vasquez don't believe people can change, he continued, a muscle working in his jaw. They remember blood debts across generations. A photograph on the bookshelf caught Olivia's attention. A younger Montgomery in construction gear standing beside a beautiful woman with Grace's same dark curls, both laughing in what looked like Central Park. The woman's hands were positioned mid-sign, capturing a moment of animated conversation. Ava believed I could be better than my upbringing, Montgomery said softly, following Olivia's gaze to the photograph. She was the first person who saw me as something other than Joey Montgomery's violent son, the heir to his empire. Montgomery's expression darkened as he poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, sliding one toward Olivia. 3 generations of blood feuds tend to blur ethical lines. Vasquez believes I was responsible for his brother's disappearance last year. Were you? The question escaped before Olivia could censor herself, hanging in the air between them like an unexploded bomb. No, Montgomery answered simply, meeting her gaze directly. But I know who was, and I've been protecting them in exchange for information on Vasquez's operations. Outside, rain began to fall against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shadowed patterns across the room that matched the moral complexity of their conversation. I inherited this life, Ms. Parker. My father built his empire on violence, and I've spent 7 years trying to transform it into something legitimate. For Grace, Olivia whispered, understanding dawning as pieces clicked into place. You're trying to create something you can pass to her without shame. Montgomery nodded, vulnerability flashing briefly across his features. Ava made me promise before she died that Grace would have choices I never did, that she wouldn't be trapped by family legacy or fear. The sound of small feet interrupted them, as Grace appeared in her pajamas, signing that she couldn't sleep. Montgomery immediately softened, kneeling to her level as he explained in sign that they were discussing her school situation. "I don't want to leave my friends," Grace signed, her small face crumpling with the injustice only a child can fully express. "Today they learned to sign with me. Ms. Parker taught everyone my name." Montgomery looked helplessly at Olivia, the powerful businessman momentarily at a loss before his daughter's distress. The contrast between his ruthless reputation and this gentle father struck Olivia anew. "What if there was another option?" Olivia said slowly, an idea forming that was either brilliant or career suicide. "What if we could prove to the board that Grace's presence actually benefits the entire student body?" The auditorium of Westwick Academy buzzed with anticipation 2 weeks later, every seat filled with parents, board members, and curious faculty as Olivia stood nervously backstage. The celebration of communication had been her most daring professional gamble. Grace peeked around the curtain at her classmates lined up in perfect rows, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Everyone will watch me," she signed, her small hands trembling slightly. "They'll watch all of you together," Olivia corrected, kneeling beside her. "Remember how much your friends wanted to learn your language? Today they get to show everyone how special that connection is." Principal Harrison stepped to the microphone with visible reluctance, his prepared statement carefully worded to avoid any mention of the controversy that had engulfed the school. "Today, our first-grade class will present a special demonstration of their recent extracurricular learning." The curtains parted to reveal 22 first-graders arranged in choir formation, Grace positioned proudly in the center front row. As music began, something extraordinary happened. The children began to sing, "What a Wonderful World," while simultaneously signing the lyrics in perfect ASL. On the wings, Olivia caught sight of Detective Rivera conferring with Montgomery's security team, their vigilant posture revealing that today's gathering wasn't without risk. The police presence had been Montgomery's compromise. Public events meant vulnerability, but Grace deserved her moment of triumph. The past 2 weeks had transformed Olivia's classroom into a sanctuary of inclusion, with students staying after hours to perfect their signing, parents volunteering to create costumes, and even Harrison reluctantly providing additional resources once public opinion began shifting in Grace's favor. 3 rows behind Montgomery sat Mrs. Chen from the school board, whose deaf sister had been denied educational opportunities decades earlier. Her eyes glistened with tears as she watched the children sign with confidence and joy, the personal significance of this moment transcending school politics. What none of the audience realized was how close the showcase had come to cancellation just yesterday, when a black sedan had circled the school repeatedly, causing Montgomery to nearly withdraw Grace from the performance. Only Olivia's impassioned plea that running would teach Grace the wrong lesson had convinced him. Behind the singing children, a projection screen displayed photographs of their 2-week journey, Grace patiently correcting hand positions, students practicing during lunch breaks, and the moment when deaf students from a neighboring school had visited to share their experiences, creating bridges between communities previously separated. Grace's face illuminated with joy as she signed alongside her classmates, her movements graceful and confident as she occasionally helped guide a friend's hand position. The audience fell into stunned silence before the first parent began to cry, then another, the emotion spreading like ripples across water. Montgomery sat in the front row, his normally guarded expression open with undisguised pride and something that looked remarkably like hope. Beside him sat Detective Rivera and several business associates, their presence a clear statement about Grace's protection. "For our next piece," Olivia announced when the applause subsided, "the children would like to share what they've learned about deaf culture and communication. Each student has prepared a brief presentation about famous deaf artists, scientists, and leaders throughout history." One by one, the children stepped forward, speaking and signing simultaneously as they presented their research on remarkable deaf individuals who had changed the world. Each concluded by signing "Thank you" directly to Grace, acknowledging her role as their teacher. By the time the presentation ended, the atmosphere in the auditorium had transformed completely. Parents who had demanded Grace's removal now approached Montgomery with congratulations. Board members whispered urgently among themselves, and Harrison's forced smile had given way to genuine contemplation. "The Montgomery Foundation is pleased to announce a donation," Montgomery stated at the reception afterward, his public voice smooth and practiced. "We will be funding a comprehensive sign language program for all Westwick students, alongside scholarships for deaf students from across New York City." The announcement sent ripples of excitement through the crowd, Though Olivia noted the calculating expressions on several board members' faces, the financial benefits of Montgomery's continued patronage clearly outweighing their previous concerns. Principles, it seemed, were negotiable when significant donations were involved. Grace tugged at Olivia's hand later that evening as they stood in the empty auditorium, the child's expression serious as she signed, "My father says you risked your job for me. Why would you do that?" "Because everyone deserves to be heard," Olivia signed back, her heart full as she watched Grace process this simple truth. And sometimes we need to help others listen. 1 year later, Olivia stood nervously in the newly renovated Montgomery Learning Center, formerly the East Wing of Westwick Academy, now transformed into Manhattan's premier inclusive education facility. Beside her, Montgomery, Jonathan now, after months of careful friendship evolving into something deeper, adjusted his tie before the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.